Hello, friends. Welcome
Hi.
back. It's it's us again
It is.
with another chapter of this interesting thing.
It's delightful. Delightful indeed.
It's honestly, it's kind of amazing. Like
It
every
is.
chapter is surprisingly dense.
Mm-hmm.
Just so much happens that you would be like, oh, clearly we've been through 3 chapters. Like, no, this is 2. We're on chapter 2. And
Precisely.
it's going fast. It's going
Mm-hmm.
fast. So, first off, if you haven't listened to this podcast before, it's weird that you would start with this episode, but okay. How's it going? I'm Moonhorse, and this is my wonderful sibling River.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh well, it's lovely to have you. This is the Bad Ideas Book Club, and we are reading "Satan Was a Lesbian." The past tense is a little worrisome, but
Oh, okay. We can get into that. Maybe after we finish this book, we can look back at the title and say, why are we saying past tense here? Actually, this chapter might give us some small hints into that.
this chapter was very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot happened. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I don't really know how to describe it. Just a lot of things happened, and it was very like again. It felt like this is a bunch of different chapters, but they're all here, and all of these things are happening, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like okay. And honestly,
Right.
we'll get to something that I think is kind of fascinating. But
Mhm.
we start. We start with the dream that Charlene is having.
Is it a dream or is it a kind of a just a memory, just kind of a retrospective?
Yeah, it's framed as a dream, but it seems to be more of a
Mm,
memory than anything.
right.
In which Charlene witnesses something absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody who uh does he work for the dad? Is that what I was getting from this? Like he works for her family?
It seemed as though, well, it seemed as though this was just a local person who knew her and was kind of familiar with her and her situation, kind of part of that small town thing where everybody knows each other. And it's placed at this critical point where children will take in this information, they'll retain it, um, and it will sort of shape their understanding of the world moving forward. And, you know, we all know that as children, we develop these kinds of understandings. It's a critical age. Um, and so this moment kind of it prefaces a fascination with death, which is something that we can definitely highlight here. Um,
Yeah.
and it takes us back to this that vampiric idea that we were talking about before, but it also, in some small way, makes this more of a product of its time. Would you say?
Yeah, because we don't. So the to explain this in a way, I'm trying not to get this to be too horrific, but this is
Of
your
course.
quick warning. I don't have a
Mhm.
timestamp, but skip ahead if you don't want to hear this. Basically, this man was asked, I believe, specifically by Charlene's father to uh, get rid of 3 kittens, and he drowns them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And she witnesses this and doesn't understand like why, because she liked the kittens, and
Mhm.
she doesn't understand the concept between life and death, and this
Yeah.
guy in an incredibly awkward moment is trying to explain it because he didn't even know she was there when this happened.
Uh-huh.
So it's pretty dark, but at the same time it's a lot of he's trying to explain this and trying to be as nice as possible, and it's still pretty messed up. It's pretty messed up that this kind of happened. But yeah, like it also kind of reads into the next part in which she's talking about wanting to move out of her parents' house and be away from them. And you can tell there's a kind of animosity towards her, specifically her father. I didn't really get a huge amount of, like, don't care for the mother, just kind of like her mother's very passive, and she doesn't really, like, I guess she doesn't like her, but it's more of a, like, you should stand up for yourself kind of mentality.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering how perhaps this event had, like, effects on that, because this wasn't just, witnessing what happened to these kittens. Those were kittens she liked. She specifically stated that.
Yeah.
And her father thought they were just nuisances and wanted them gone. So I wonder if that's not something that kind of started that.
Well, we also kind of have to remember that these were not her biological parents. These were
That's
her
true.
guardians who took her in after her parents' death. We don't really get we don't really get a sense of who her biological parents were. So this like of course we wouldn't talk about another person like this, but in a piece of literature that would frame a character as instantly displaced.
Yeah.
Um, we like at this point we're still really trying to get a sense of how we should feel about this character, and actually to kind of answer your question a little bit more, I'd like to turn to like the direction that she goes in her education. Um, she she gets she develops this interest in the sciences, in
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, in psychology, and in the time period that this was published, there were literally different activist movements from LGBT plus individuals. I read a retrospective specifically focused on queer women, in which their interaction with activism and psychology changed between the 1960s to the 1970s. Um, they we we call it, and I believe, I hope I'm getting this correctly, this anti-psychology movement, which isn't like a movement against mental health,
Mm-hmm.
but it's against making a person's queer identity equivalent to a mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
which was how they were thinking about it at the time. Um, the first strategy that they note was a more collaborative strategy where queer women wanted to work with medical professionals in order to get this removed as a diagnosis, because people could be diagnosed gay,
Yeah.
homosexual, um, and they didn't want that. So they wanted to work with mental health professionals in order to get that removed. But then in the 1970s, we have a more oppositional strategy in which, you know, queer women would tell other queer women, don't go to a mental health professional. They're just going to diagnose you as homosexual and just leave it at that.
Yeah. That's
You know,
true.
you're not going to get the help you need. So that places this book in kind of a weird in between space between the collaborative and oppositional strategies. Um, so I'm wondering kind of if this book sits on a stance between one or the other.
That's possible. I
Mhm.
never thought about that, but yeah, that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
it it really kind of stood out to me as Charlene is far more intelligent than she lets on.
Absolutely.
She It's not necessarily manipulation for control when she does that. It's a lot about survival.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes she gets what she wants, but a lot of times you can tell it's also to establish her place in what it is she's trying to do.
Uh-huh.
And because she gets, kind of stereotyped by the people around her as just some dumb girl, they don't
Mm-hmm.
think that she could be this, intelligent and that she could work around them. And it works in her favor a lot. So
Right.
a lot of like to go to the whole conversation with her guardians and about moving out.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept pushing against this because oh, there's no reason to go, or oh, how would you be able to take care of this? How would you be able to do these things? And then she does it easily.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just about being independent, it's about being somewhere where she can feel the most open. Like she can have her own place and she doesn't feel that around them. I'm not entirely sure if it's because they're somewhat controlling or if it's just because they're way too close.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it is also they live on this farm, and she doesn't
Yeah.
really want to be a farm girl. She wants to have.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that she absolutely hates the farm in general. It's that she wants to have her own life defined by her own terms,
Yes.
which is
And
honestly,
yeah.
yeah, that's a good stance to have. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about complete disdain for her guardians or just generally life on the farm. She admits that she doesn't really know about farming or really like it that much, but specifically says, quoting from this, I should think you know by now, Kurt, as far as I'm concerned, it's your farm, and it will remain your farm as long as you want it. She doesn't really think of it as hers, and I think she would feel that way even if they just gave it to her or if they both passed away and she just inherited it. She doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it belongs to her.
Yeah. Exactly. And this it's not the beginning of her self-exploration, but it's definitely a step forward in that. And they do end up coming to a kind of a compromise, um, which I think, what would her age be about at this point?
Well, see, that's also an interesting one because we
Yeah.
also have to take into account the time period.
Uh-huh.
And if I were to take into account the time period, the fact that they don't think that she's mature enough to do this or responsible
Hmm.
enough to live on her own, I'd have to say maybe between 18 and 22.
Something
Because,
like that.
yeah, because, nowadays, that's more than old enough. That's, yeah, perfect.
Right.
You're whatever. But this is, what, the
In what
late.
economy?
Yeah, really, that too. Uh, but when this was written, this was what, late
Uh-huh.
50s, early 60s, something like that. I think we established it was
Late
sometime in the 60s.
60s. Yeah,
Yeah,
late
because
60s.
the car from the last chapter was referred to as a 66 Impala.
Yeah.
So even then, even during the big liberation of the 60s, it was still in a lot of places this idea that, oh, women just can't live on their own. They're not capable without some man taking care of them.
Hmm.
And even with, this huge liberation happening, this is also obviously a really rural area, a very country kind of, because clearly they're on a farm. And that, I think, would also still kind of play into it. So they didn't think, even someone as old as like 18 to 20 something at this point would be mature enough to handle her own home, which, again, by modern standards, that seems ridiculous. But now it's more like, how the hell are you going to afford it? Because we're all poor. And rent is $700. So,
Yeah. And I don't know if in that, also in that certain area, it might not have been customary for one's um one's child to move out at a certain age.
that's true too. Um,
Because like we have to take into account also um not just time and finances, but also culture.
yes, it's interesting you bring that up because though we haven't talked about the other characters in this chapter yet,
Uh-huh.
all of them from the last chapter and into this one, all of them do seem to live with family still,
Yes.
which doesn't imply age as much as I thought it would. Like, because
Hmm.
nowadays you say something like that, and it's like, oh, well, then they must be, under 18 at the very least.
Hmm.
But that doesn't really seem to be the case, because a lot of them also seem to be, like, in college or some sort of job. Hell, what's her name? Cynthia from the last chapter didn't
Yes.
just live with her family, but owned her own car. Like, outright owned it. And so it's like, okay, so they're not, like, young people. So it's like,
You're absolutely right.
yeah, so it's interesting because we don't have the same frame of reference from when this was written.
Hmm.
Because clearly we weren't, born when this was written. So it's it's like trying to piece together things from this. It's like trying to piece together specifically what society, for example, was like when Shakespeare wrote his plays, because they're not necessarily about society, but there's always going to be things like, oh, this is common, people do this, and so
Hmm.
it winds up, because that's the natural process of writing. You write, write what you write what seems natural, and you will, of course, include things that are common to your experience around you, because
Hmm.
that's normal. It doesn't feel out of place at all. But when you're so far removed from it, you're trying to piece together these things without, like, a guide. Like, you don't really know
Yeah.
why it's this way, but you can kind of catch hints as to why it's this way.
I do have a little bit of a theory,
Mm-hmm.
and this just comes from my reading of like 19th century novels, even some 20th century novels. Let me use Pride and Prejudice as an example. All of the women in that book, they live at home with their families until they get married.
Yes, that's also true.
And once they, you know, get married, they live with their husband, they're in another residence, and that's specifically when they move out. Now, even though this was um, this was published in 1966,
Mm-hmm.
I, I wouldn't see that as too outrageous that these are just all women who um, are waiting to get married to leave their home.
That's also true. A lot of times, like, this is clearly being framed as a somewhat rural community, and a lot of
Hmm.
times, religious practices, not saying that any of their families are super devoutly religious, but one of
Of
them
course.
is that women don't live alone. You can't move out until you're married. You have to have a suitor.
Yeah.
And, like, we see that with, like, people who are like fundamentalists today. That's a thing in a lot of
Hmm.
that. They don't move out of their house
Yeah.
unless they're married or something, and that's a whole thing. So you could
Yeah.
be right. It could be a lot of that too, which also might explain why they seem like grown people rather than like just some teenagers.
Absolutely. I think that you're onto something there. It's probable that Charlene might have grown up in a more religious household.
That's also true. There's a lot of like little hints that are kind of indicative of that. There's also, especially with like the community at large, with like
Yeah.
the other people that she interacts with. This is not taking place in like New York or something. This is
No.
clearly some town somewhere, possibly middle America. And that would be fairly common at the time, not so much
Mhm.
now, I don't imagine, but this was the end of the 50s into the middle of the 60s. This was that whole, there was obviously a cultural revolution happening, but this was still, the very conservative 50s. So we're
Yeah.
still coming out of that, and the biggest sparks of this kind of cultural revolution don't start in like Ohio. They tend to start on your coasts first.
Yeah.
So,
Would yeah, and
mhm.
like that doesn't mean that areas outside of that are not going to be influenced by that, but they might be later arrivals.
Yes, yes. So we can feel like that's not entirely a thing that has happened
Mhm.
here yet. It may be happening in other places, but it's not in this particular area. Because there's still a lot of like Charlene getting her own apartment and her own job where she's not entirely trusted with doing anything more than just kind of menial things, specifically because you can tell they're kind of look down on her for just being a woman. And she uses that animosity to fuel her own desire to be like, I'm not going to let these
Mhm.
people hold me down. I am better than this. I am stronger than this.
Yeah.
So, in the midst of this, um, after she finally does move out and she gets a job working at a movie theater,
Yeah.
or as the book calls it, a local movie house, which is a term I have not heard in a very long time.
It's
uh,
interesting, and yeah, I like that.
it's fascinating, but they also
Mhm.
the writer also points out that, to quote from the book again, uh, hired by a nervous manager who couldn't seem to take his eyes off of her during the interview and who showed the familiar symptoms of not wanting to get too close to her, which tells me that she doesn't exude like this kind of demure energy that you see from some of the other characters. Charlene is not one to be fucked with. She's already decided this is what I want in life, and I will fight to make it happen, which is pretty admirable.
It is, and if uh, I just want to call into question the here. Would this description be Charlene trying to kind of make sense of the world and just kind of scoping out how people like look at her, how people view her? Could this come from, her study of psychology, of the humanities, of sciences, and that's just how she interprets that expression?
It could, um, because it's definitely framed that when she talks about being in, or rather, the narration talks about her being in high
Yeah.
school, that the boys would go from being interested in her to feeling animosity because she wasn't interested in them. And given how independent she is, I imagine her rejection was not like a gentle thing. If she said no, she meant no. And
Yeah.
in this particular mindset of a place like this in a rural area raised on these kind of religious values, let's be honest, a lot of fucking men do not take no well. And that's fucked up, but it is true. And I imagine her
Of course.
pushback to that and her strength in that just kind of steeled her resolve to be like, I don't let people take advantage of me. I don't
Mhm.
let people, if I don't want someone close to me, they're not getting close.
And it's interesting that this is supposed to come from a book that really takes this society seriously.
Mm-hmm. Like, to go back to the first chapter, when she first met Cynthia, her response was just like to immediately think that there's something wrong. To immediately be like, all right, this lady's creepy. What do you want?
Yeah.
And then as soon as she proclaimed, like, oh no, I'm interested in you and all these other things, like, okay, then now we're interested more in talking. But
Yeah.
she has a defensiveness that's born of, from what I can tell, an actual thing. Like, her defensiveness is not without merit. It does exist for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. And her meeting with Cynthia in some small way does kind of mirror her first meeting with Marianne in a lot of ways, as I'm sure you noticed, except with one distinct difference. The where she meets Cynthia, that's at a drive-in, correct?
Yes.
And in the movie house, we're thinking more indoors in a more closed space, right?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I'm not sure, but I definitely see. So, okay. From what I
Mm,
can figure out, from what I've learned from this scene, well, from this chapter and the last one,
yeah,
is this town, maybe it's a small city. They don't really name it, so it's
yeah,
just this area clearly has a a gay scene somewhere, but it's very underground.
very, yes.
Like the only again, like, with Cynthia finding out about Charlene and Marianne from this one, they don't just
Mhm.
come up and talk to each other. They have to like watch her for a while to see if any of this is true. And
Yeah,
that to me kind of implies that there is something in, like, there's obviously a pushback in this town where
mhm.
it's you're not allowed to be anything but straight. So everything kind of has to be done in the shadows.
Amazing. The author must have had like some intimate knowledge of this.
It definitely feels like it because, again, with Marianne, she kind of watches her for a while.
Calls her
Cynthia,
a wolf.
yeah, which is interesting. I didn't like, after reading that part. There's a whole thing about how
Mhm.
how it. When I read the part, like, I'm gonna quote it. Her thought about wolves had covered only the male of the species. However, she had forgotten that there are females of the species, including wolves. Interesting wording, but also, uh, that in the next line. Now, this whole section, I was just like, okay, so Charlene kind
Uh-huh.
of has a thought. She's like a lone wolf, and it's like it's quite likely
Yeah.
that Marianne Adams had never thought of herself as a wolf before. Sorry, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
wait, considering I read their entire interaction, that's the wolf. Are you sure?
Yeah. Well, and it's weird. Do we consider Cynthia to also be a wolf, or are we looking at Cynthia as someone who like removes Charlene from a public space into a very smaller, more intimate private space? And are we looking at Marianne as a wolf because this, like, basically the staging of those interactions just looks different?
it's
And like everything just like stays out in the open, but is still like very implicit, I guess.
it's a little odd because it implies through language like this, like they were the ones specifically to be like the to use nonsensical predator prey analogies. They were the ones preying on Charlene when it's like that doesn't match her personality at all. Like
Well,
Charlene, the one who's constantly in control, the one who is, I don't let anyone fuck with me. That kind of I will handle this myself is the one being preyed upon. it seems a little. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I follow where the writer is going with this.
Well, you got to remember when we get to Marianne, Charlene doesn't really know what she's.
That's
And there
true.
is a scene that specifically kind of lays that out. And Charlene becomes open to that and learns how to interact, I guess, with that side of her, which it's interesting that a book like this would do that. Because I would think, and this just comes from kind of my own understanding of kind of the trajectory of this kind of literature, when you are um, the stock lesbian character who's destined to always be a lesbian, you already have intimate knowledge of how you're supposed to behave. Like that's innate to you.
Hmm.
But the way that this book lays it out, that what you do, specifically sexual, has to be learned,
Hmm.
which is, actually true for people. But it also suggests, if we're looking at it from a more rhetorical perspective, that being a lesbian, being a queer woman isn't innate and it has to be learned. That is another possible reading.
I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Hmm.
I will say before we move on to the next actual deeper part, there's this one specific notation of how she stopped in a small drugstore coffee shop. First off, that's an interesting combination. I didn't know they did that. For an egg
Yeah,
sandwich and a cup of coffee, and I can feel my cholesterol rising already. So, just like an egg sandwich. Oh God, no! Oh.
I can't imagine.
I know. It's just because it's not like what we think now, where it's like it's egg whites. It's like I just imagine a fried ass egg on two pieces of bread, and just like oh God, and it probably had butter, but that's just a thing with me. Like ew, no.
I can imagine it's inexpensive.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I so they meet back and forth several times,
Mhm.
and then of course we have the idea of going to the lake.
Yep.
There is a whole thing. I'm just gonna point this out because this has happened twice now. Uh,
Oh.
we have more robes. There are
Yes.
more robes. I don't know what the whole point of the robes are, but this is like they don't just
Well,
show up as like a garment. They're described in detail, which makes me think something specific about the person who wrote this. So
mhm.
I do kind of wonder about this.
Well, it's specifically a larger rope.
Yes.
You know what it makes me think of? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of older movies where they have specific musical numbers where women wear these very large coats over kind of like a sleek kind of a dress, and then they
Hmm.
lose the coat
Yeah, I never
for
thought
a
about it,
kind of
but I
a
think you might be onto
dance
something.
sequence. Maybe and I'm not sure if that was a specific thing, but I also remember a scene like that being a part of a staging of a gypsy that I saw once, where they showed Gypsy Rose Lee removing a larger coat and just unzipping the back of her dress. So it
Hmm.
was like the start of it was the start of a striptease.
Hmm. So the whole robe thing is so they can go to the lake. And Marianne explained specifically that her mother doesn't like the fact that she just wants to be naked sometimes, which
Well,
that's not even the part that makes me uncomfortable. It's the fact that she says mama about 4 or 5 times, and now I'm deeply uncomfortable. Don't say that. Because it's
uh-huh,
like,
uh-huh, uh,
okay. but it's very okay. And so,
Also, can we just point to this part where Charlene says, "Don't flip, Marianne. Mama is not here now, and I don't care if you walk down Main Street in your birthday suit."
yes. I it feels very like once you've read enough of this, you kind of get a sense for Charlene's way of talking, and
Uh-huh.
it feels like half flirting and half please stop saying mama. Like it's getting a
Well,
little awkward.
you also don't get a sense of how Charlene's talking because in some places she's like a little more dialectical, and in some places she's I don't know how to describe it, but I would call it unaccented by our
Mm,
standards. Um,
yeah, that makes sense.
but and we even pointed out in the first chapter, Charlene's voice changes a lot, and we can read those changes happening depending on who she talks to.
Yes, she does kind of have a, I don't know if you would call it almost like a specific performance
Hmm.
when she's talking to certain people.
Yeah. And it's either that, because I mean, you can very easily read it that way. Of course, one could also make the case of, when you talk to people who carry a certain accented way of speaking, you kind of pick up on that. But I don't know if that's necessarily what Charlene is doing. It's more of like her guard being up, I guess.
I think, yeah, that kind of sounds, that sounds right. Yeah, I think you might be right on
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
So we have this whole going swimming,
Yeah.
which turns into a lot more because of course it does. Uh, see, and this is the thing that's like fascinating to me about this because we said this in the first episode, I guess, about our backgrounds in specific types of literature.
Yeah.
We're both avid readers, but you
Yeah.
have a more, I guess one would say, proper education.
I have, well, to be upfront, I do have a master's in literature. I don't equate degrees to intelligence, but I did take courses that really focused a lot on specific types of close reading that do influence my way of reading certain things in a very different way. And you also have excellent close reading, and they're just influenced by different things, like other things that you've read, you know?
Yes.
Um, so we both, basically what it boils down to is we both read things in different ways, and we both kind of have a lot to bring to this kind of medium.
That's yeah. But what I find fascinating about this is a lot of my history is with usually things written online,
Yes.
and I started reading amateur fiction, fan fiction, stuff like that when I was in high school. So a lot of what I'm used to started in the early 2000s up until relatively recently. I mean, I still don't have anything against reading weird things on the internet, obviously.
Nor should
But
you.
yeah, but what fascinates me is this is an entire book that was billed from so many people talking about it on the internet and billed from its own kind of scandalous cover and I don't know, history as this very deeply lesbian erotica. And
Hmm.
I have read 2 chapters of this and I've still seen far more graphic things, which fascinates me not because it's not on the same level, but because this was considered too far at one point.
It was. It
And that's
certainly
just,
was.
it really is fascinating because like now it seems tame. It seems almost like
Mhm.
laughable by comparison, but it really is just kind of interesting that
Mhm.
this was considered too far for a lot of people. This was just, oh no, that's too much. But then with the same reading we've had so far when talking about this,
Mhm.
the different depths of character, how Charlene's an interesting character, the obvious proclivities of the town and things around her.
Yeah.
This is incredibly intelligent for a book that's just supposed to be about lesbian sex. So, I have to
Well,
say that.
was probably influenced by other accessible pieces of literature.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Carmilla, which, of course it was out and accessible during that time. Um, it's on Project Gutenberg right now. Anybody can read it, and it's fairly short. Um, and there are actually some similarities to other works of literature. It would not surprise me if this came from another reader who was just genuinely interested in, this, well, culture, and wanted to kind of represent it somehow. Um, Maybe it was good natured, maybe it was not good natured. We don't really know. All we know is what we have.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me because, like, I'm not used to seeing something like this, but it is still just wildly interesting because
Mhm.
it's when you've been surrounded by, I mean, not, I guess surrounded isn't a very good term, but like when you know how these things are usually written on like online forums and things like that, it
Yep.
usually comes across as, this would come across as tame, but tame and also surprisingly detailed and
Yes.
deep for something that's usually not that deep online. Usually it's like we're getting
Mhm.
to one specific thing, and when you want to write a story that's like deep and about characters, you're not specifically writing erotica. So it's like
Right.
interesting to see this happening. But
Well,
it's not a.
yeah. What I think is interesting, just jumping off of your point, is
Mm-hmm.
are we as readers supposed to have, coming from this, more of an intimacy with Charlene than her partners within the novel?
I think perhaps because it is seeming to focus specifically on her. Hi there, it's me, that guy you've been listening to. I know, this is weird. Also, if you've been enjoying this podcast, I imagine you have because you're, listening to it. If you, yes, you, I mean it, you, I'm talking to you, wanted to read one of the books that we are reading right now in this very strange and fun adventure that we're on, you can do that by checking out the list specifically on bookshop.org. That's right, bookshop.org/shop/moonhorse. That is the list where we put all of our books that we have read or will read on this fantastic show. If you want to read along with us, find the kind of strange things that we're into, and actually kind of enjoy this, more than you already are, you can do that by going there. Bookshop.org is a fantastic resource for independent booksellers and just, generally everybody. Oh, you don't have to buy from freaking Amazon, you know what I'm saying? Go there, check it out, become a part of our own strange literary cult. It's a cult. All right, it's not a cult. It's not cool enough to be a cult, but it is a fun show which you're listening to, and we hope you enjoy it. So thank you for being a part of this. Make sure you check out bookshop.org. That's bookshop.org/shop/moonhorse. It's a long URL, but an even longer list of books.
Yes. And we as readers understand her much more than, say, Cynthia does, than Marianne does, because we've established that Charlene speaks very vaguely about herself and doesn't really give much away. Um, she says a lot without really saying anything. And we know very little about her except for this chapter. We get to know a little bit more about her history and factors that influenced her and her view of the world. We still don't know her, but we're also a little more intimate. Um, and also there's a lot of different like plays. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
have odd adverbs here and there, but consider the fact that maybe the sound of those adverbs are like we would say it's silly. There's the word bluely in here somewhere, and it's weird, but
It is.
also like placing that in the middle of the sentence, the cadence of that word, reading it out loud, it's not an unpleasant cadence. Um, and I could see something like this meant to be read out loud to some effect, and that is the form of erotica that this is.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say current discourse in erotica and current a lot of current erotica um, or authors thereof, some of them will create those um, plays. A lot of them will rely solely on kind of visualization, and will have more of that directness that a book like this would have had to um, subdue greatly in order to be published at all.
Yeah. Especially because, like, if we go with the title, though we're not nearly far
Hmm.
enough, I guess, to make a huge, specific, I don't know, judgment. It does seem like Charlene is our main focus, and that
Hmm.
she is supposed to be as characters in this have repeatedly said, she's devilish or like the devil himself, and it's like I don't really see that. I
Hmm.
mean, she's strong-willed, she's independent, but not mean.
Is Satan supposed to be mean?
Well, one would imply.
Would we?
And given the conjunction, I guess, of what at the time
Maybe.
would be the current discourse, I mean, it does kind of seem that way. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, we have like a weird spanking scene. Uh, I don't really know how to approach that, so we're just gonna move on.
Nice pivot there.
Yeah, because I have the book open and I'm looking through all of this, and it's just like, all right,
Me too.
well, it feels like every now and then it's like some of it has to go through. I think I made this same comparison in the last episode, but it's like some of it has to go through like a certain checklist, and you can tell that the author is doing something, and they're like, "Oh, right, the thing," and they have to do the thing. So it feels like this is something. It's like, all right, so we also have spanking fetish on the checklist. Here we go, check, and now back to character, and it feels like an author trying to tell a character story, and someone is just over their shoulder being like, do the thing. It's like, okay, fine, I'll do the thing.
Gosh. Wow. Yeah.
Because it does seem to like come out of left field a lot of times, where it's like there's clearly a
Hmm.
moment where these characters are connecting. Maybe not like the most romantic thing, but you can tell they both have something in mind. And now here's a weird fetish thing. And now we're back to character development. And it is very kind of like,
Yes.
okay. It just feels like, yeah, this is a thing because we have to. And it's like, all right. I mean, I kind of get it. But then again, I also have to remember the era in which this was published and the tropes around publishing anything that wasn't for the heteros. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. This
So,
was, I mean, and I mean everything that this implies, this was meant for consumption.
yeah.
Um, but also I'm trying to find that section where Charlene talks about uh relinquishing control because that was part of it. So the questing tongue came into play, and Charlene's undeveloped self-control was taxed to its fullest powers to keep um which I mean, yes, it's graphic, but the fact that
Yes.
her self-control was taxed, and she felt a disagreeable sensation at the thought of letting control out of her own hands, even for a moment.
Hmm. That does say a lot about her personality.
Yes. And then she realizes she decided that deliberate surrender to them would still leave her in actual control of the situation.
It does feel like what you're saying. It feels like anything to, in her own mind, assure herself of control of a situation.
Yes. And it actually does say a little something about why she allowed Cynthia to actually kind of take over an experience, because Cynthia does um, kind of she takes on a more dominant role. She initiates the contact. She initiates everything, but the control that Cynthia has will have to be a an illusion for Charlene. And the same is true with this interaction with Marianne, when Charlene discovers that if she allows Marianne to perform these actions, then she can still remain in control.
It does seem to be a big thing, and I wonder what it is about her that makes her want to have control over every situation. Because we really haven't touched on that hugely.
She she very much is the stock character who is always who is supposed to be always meant to be a lesbian. And
Mm-hmm.
but if that stock character in any way struggles with that identity, it sort of creates I could see that creating tension uh within the novel. She's kind of struggling to fit into that stock mold, I think. And so this book actually might be some sort of criticism of the genre in that way. Um, because when I was, as I've been reading through this, I ran into points where it does seem to kind of deviate from the genre, but I'm used to that. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
idea of the development of any genre, and by genre I mean collection of expectations, because in my view genre doesn't exist, and I'm not going to get into that, but um, this seems to be defying a lot of the expectations set for these novels, while at the same time kind of tentatively fitting that mold by containing these intimate moments between women, um, and creating the whole intimate illusion.
Yeah, it does have, like, I don't know, it's like a lot of push, well, not really push, but I guess description of these incredibly intimate moments between these women, but then it's also kind of played as if it's easy to cast off.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you're right. I wonder if that's not specifically something that's done to kind of poke at others in this genre, because that is kind of the thing of a lot of erotic fiction. It's just like the whole point is the sexual moments, so relationships
Mhm.
just kind of exist somewhat, but are easily cast aside for the next thing.
And that's something that makes this book so interesting. It's funny. My favorite book, my absolute favorite book, is called The Blue Castle,
Mm-hmm.
by Ellen Montgomery, and it was published during a time when marriage plot novels were incredibly popular. And marriage plot novels are novels that, they are romance novels and they end in a marriage. But in this novel, the marriage takes place in the middle.
Hmm.
which makes The Blue Castle not a romance novel. And, you know, I have to say, that book has, I can read that again and again and always kind of notice different and new things, because it's in a lot of ways about societal attitudes concerning sickness, different forms of sickness, both physical and mental, and what those conversations can do to a person. And that's kind of in my repeated readings, that's what the book is about for me. All I knew by a certain point was that it wasn't a romance novel. It wasn't a marriage plot novel. It had to be something else.
I've never read that book, but I'll have to look it up. It sounds interesting.
It is. It's wonderful. Well, I say that and I'm biased, but um, it kind of takes me back to your point that yes, like we have these intimate moments, but they feel very forced as though they kind of have to be there,
Yes.
and that's not an expectation of erotica. In erotica, um, versus, just smut, um, or even in addition to smut,
Mm-hmm.
these intimate moments are central. They're key to the development of the story, but here they are and they're not.
So it's really kind of wild because like this book
Mhm.
continues to defy expectations. Everything I've ever heard about it is people being like, haha, weird. But now that I've read most of it, it's like there's definitely weird. But there's also a
There's
lot
also
more to it.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would like specifically to credit the author with doing something that none of us, honestly, I didn't see coming either. It's a full twist, a twist so amazing that it makes M. Night Shyamalan look like an asshole. So Charlene
As soon
meets a
as you said
woman. Yeah, Charlene meets another woman whose name I'm not going to say yet, but comes off as incredibly entitled, really offensive, and very, like, rude. And friends, her name is Karen Brent. This is the first Karen we found her. How did no one else notice this? This is
she's well,
fascinating.
it's so funny. Yeah, and like Charlene performs an actual kind of a not- I hesitate to say psychological evaluation, but she does kind of read into Karen in a lot of ways. And like, yes, she's entitled, but Charlene is actually very kind about it. She says, she's probably just kind of used to getting her way.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of have to work with that. Um, but of course, Charlene also like needs control of the situation, and Karen is horrible to her.
There's there's three specific lines right away. I love the fact that this is Karen. She is directly a Karen. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It's also the first time uh, I think I've ever heard specifically someone use the term butch like that as an insult. And then we have this, my favorite little, one of my favorite chunks. There's several little parts of this that I really love because the writer has such a wonderful way with words in a lot of different places, which is to quote, "Blow" was Charlene's succinct advice. Like, this was
Yes.
one step away from her being like, "Get fucked."
Well, and it's funny. She also says lead on Macduff. And
Mm-hmm.
Macduff, and you're familiar with the Scottish play, of
Mm-hmm.
course. Macduff is, well, he's framed as the villain, but my God, like his family gets killed. Like, what do you
Yeah.
expect? Um, but um, a strong theme in the Scottish play. is manliness.
Yes.
Um, and it's discussed kind of throughout the text of the play, like, aren't you a man? Or like calling manliness into question. And Macduff, his presentation tends to be a little bit more ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's more of a current thing, or if because I I haven't read as much discourse on Macbeth as I would like, but I don't know if the trajectory of discourse began with just calling Macduff's manliness into question. And I don't know, again, if this book is kind of also saying that by calling Karen Macduff, you're like calling her identity as another more butch character. Again, we're looking at a stock character of um, from lesbian Pulp Fiction as a lesbian who was always meant to be lesbian.
Mm. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that's essentially what Karen wants to do. She wants to kind of figure Charlene out because Charlene is kind of infringing on that territory.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah, and like, because Karen was supposed to be the main character, or Karen's friend was supposed to be the main character. One of them was supposed to be kind of leading this.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, we have three characters that show a lot of ambiguity. None of them really perfectly fit that mold.
We also have, and I'd forgotten about this until we started going through this.
Mhm.
Because again, like I said, I have the book open, and I usually do this. I'll have the book
Me
open so
too.
I can look through what I'm going.
Uh-huh.
It's little things because they're not hugely important to the story, but they are hugely important to us understanding the framing of the world that is this. One of the lines is literally the Macduff line. Before that is the narrative of Charlene put down a dime for her Coke, slid off the stool. First off, a soda only cost a dime, and Coke is not capitalized, which means it was never thought of as a proper thing, as in not a brand. When this
Mhm.
was written, which would have been a thing in the 60s, that weren't quite as huge as they are now. So that also sets our specific timeline, our specific place, and a little ways down, we have, speaking of Karen, used to having her own way in everything except getting out of such a dead town populated by such stupid people. So again, that reinforces the idea of there specifically being like an LGBT kind of underground society,
Yeah.
community, and a lot of this hints that there is not just that, but there's like a perception, not a real hierarchy, but a perception of one. And Karen thinks of herself as the top dog.
I have a question for you, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought of this. Um, Spoiled brat, used to having her own way in everything except getting out of such a dead town populated by such stupid people. Wouldn't that normally be the main character of an actual like an erotica as we would expect an erotica to be?
Yeah.
Kind of the more dominant figure, um, seducing the less dominant figure. And we've started out that way, but now we have these two more dominant figures. And in some way, it's like it's meta. Like they are literally battling for the main character role in this book.
Yes, it actually does feel like that. This whole, it's clearly building towards a very like erotic encounter, but it feels less
Of
like the
course.
last ones where it's like, oh, but this is very sexual, and more like a fight, more like a no, you're not good enough, and it's back and forth. There's a lot of like Karen demanding things, Charlene constantly telling her like there's no need to rush, and her getting mad about that,
Oh
and
yeah.
then it's just going back and forth. And there's a lot more dialogue between these two than there have been in any of the other encounters. Mainly because the other encounters are more about the physical actions. But again, this feels like two characters getting into a fight, less than
Yes.
anything else. And their battlefield is proving who is, for lack of a better term, the alpha lesbian. It really does kind of feel like that. It's very, like, shocking.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But I guess Charlene is very kind of she comes to be more of more accepting of her own um, gender ambiguity
Mm-hmm.
or gender presentation ambiguity. I don't know what the best way to phrase that would be, but we get to a point, and I know that we're not quite there yet, but this doesn't necessarily spoil it. Um, she talks about going from like femme to butch to femme to butch,
Mm-hmm.
and I find that I find that specific set of wording to be very interesting because she she seems to accept that. Like she doesn't appear to be fighting that necessarily. It's the people around her who are fighting that, and like she just kind of accepts who she is. Um, she comes from like wanting to be a certain way to just kind of accepting feeling like she can assume any role and still maintain control of the situation that she's in. Like she doesn't have to worry about those labels.
Yeah. And it's really interesting throughout the entire first episode, and even spots throughout this one, that
Mhm.
you've specifically referenced a vampire story because Charlene bites a woman's neck. During
She
this
does?
fight, she does bite Karen's neck in a very almost vampiric way, and
Yep.
it's a whole thing about dominance. And then right in the end, I do have to say, this book again is always coming out with weird lines that I really love, but this one totally struck me. So yeah, she basically like bit this woman's neck, and she was like frozen from this, and her whisper was husky and odd. Good God, don't bother him, Karen.
Other
You're
him,
dealing
Karen.
with me. It's like, okay, so immediately Charlene's become an action hero and is ready to kick some ass. So it's kind of
Clearly.
amazing.
Well, and also normally more vampiric characters are repelled by the cross.
Yes.
So let's consider this moment just for a second. Don't bother with God. You're dealing with me. She has a little bit of an aversion to God, not because he is God and like religious stuff, but because, religion doesn't matter when it's her. And
Yeah.
she's in,
She's got the
and
fire in this
she's,
situation.
yeah, uh-huh.
And
Yep.
then immediately afterwards, she's basically like, this was the fight. And she won. And now she's subdued
Mhm.
Karen. And so we get into some, what you would expect with that. There's a lot of very sexual things, but the theme,
Yeah,
like the whole thematic nature of their interaction has completely changed. Karen
yeah,
has submitted, and Charlene is now in charge. And then we get into weird foot things.
yeah. And like, again, Karen has been bitten. She's become slave to the vampiric character.
Mm-hmm. And now she's having to be completely prostrated.
Yep.
Just, no, you must submit. And she does. And that's the whole thing. It really does feel like if this was just if Charlene was just a vampire, this book would have gone kind of in the same way.
Exactly.
Um,
What if this was meant to be a vampire story?
it would be fascinating because it's it's literally like the weirdest way when it comes to finding victims. They always find her. So the vampire is not out hunting
Yes.
people. They keep coming to her, and she's not really trying. She's just existing, and then they show up.
Well, that's sort of the thing with vampires. They are meant to be physically very attractive, but also kind of have this other worldly aura that both attracts and repels. Like people have an instinct like this person is dangerous, but certain people are drawn to that, which that's kind of what like how I kind of formed my analysis of Charlene as a more vampiric character is because
Mm-hmm.
that kind of happens. And that's kind of how she analyzes situations. Like she kind of has this magical, mystical aura that attracts some people and repels others. And then we don't necessarily have vampire hunters, at least not yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have the stars of the Gothic romance who show up to the castle because they are lured by um, Charlene's energy, or however you want to put it, however it makes the most sense. Um, and it makes this book a very interesting case study for that. I think, and also vampires and werewolves. We had our wolf earlier.
Yes. And then we get into some really messed up territory. Because Charlene gets kidnapped.
Does.
And I was not expecting that, but at the same time, it's like, there's something going on. We hinted, or speculated rather, at the idea of there being like this, for lack of a better term, this kind of LGBT underground society, community,
Mhm.
something. And there is a clear, like, idea of a hierarchy.
Mhm.
Because once Charlene pretty much just subdued Karen's like, oh, you have to meet my friend Billy, you have to meet these people. And then another fight happens. Another, oh, you've been trapped. We're in the same thing. And it's like, yeah, it literally does feel like there is a hierarchy and you tried to be dominant and we don't like that. It's very like, I didn't see this coming. This is very like, I
Mhm.
don't think this is a thing, but at the same time, this is very weird.
Yeah, and it's also maybe a little bit, I don't want to say cultish,
Mm-hmm.
but are we framing queer culture as cultish and something that someone can be indoctrinated into? I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I don't like that kind of representation. I don't know if that's what we're trying to do, but that's kind of where my mind goes, with kind of the intensity of this interaction.
I agree, actually. I think you might be right. But, again, what really stands out is this. We speculated that this book might have at one point been a vampire story, but then was just kind of altered.
Mhm.
In a lot of vampire fiction, there's like this idea of there being some sort of hierarchy. Like, there's always a
Yes.
much more powerful vampire, and they have to be like subservient to that one. The idea of them being
Yes.
like this, you know, anarchistic rage and beauty wasn't a thing until like the 80s, specifically around the
Yes.
time of like your Lost Boys and things like that. But before that, there
Yep.
was a lot of this idea of there is a hierarchy, and I wonder if that's not what this is. Changing it does feel like you said it's uncomfortable to be like, are we supposed to think that there's a gay cult, like the cult of gay? if there is, I'm in charge of it. But also,
That's true. That's true.
I demand. But it does feel kind of like that's not how any of this works. But if you frame it as like, oh, but it's about these vampires, and it's like that kind of feels like what goes on. I'm not a huge fan
Yeah.
of that particular framework about vampires, and it gets extra
Oh
weird
no.
with this. So it's like I'm already a little weirded out by that, and then this whole thing is like, okay, this is really weird.
Well, yeah, and I remember reading the original Dracula, well, the epistolary fiction, the letters, um, and it's interesting because um, Mina, the first woman to turn into a like a vampire, they witness kind of her transformation, and she turns into um, she starts as a very calm and a very docile figure, and she suddenly turns into a more belligerent one that tries to fight everyone, and she doesn't really have um a lot of command of speech when she turns into a vampire. Um and I don't know if that just sort of like comes with time within that set of expectations. Um but then with something like Carmilla, the Carmilla figure, she is ev- she is everything that a woman should be except for very fussy.
Mm-hmm.
And you run into these moments, she's kind of she's being a little mean, but everybody loves her because she's beautiful, and she develops this attachment to this woman that she happens to be living with. And tragic circumstances have forced her to live with her, and what she does is she drains their life force and drains their energy. Um, and in Carmilla, the lead character, the narrator, she doesn't die, but she ends up traumatized from the whole experience. All of these three characters, Karen, Charlene, and Billy, they strike me more, if we're going with the more vampiric um, analogy, they appear to wish to claim not necessarily the actual life force, not like people's lives, but they want to they want the energy of the women who live around themselves. They want to keep that energy. That's how they live. That's how they stay alive.
Yeah, it's the entire interaction between these three in this part. First off, it seems like it's going to be yet another, like we said, we have another fetish checklist.
Of course.
Because it seems like, oh, now we're going for the whole bondage S&M thing, but the response to the end of that is just fascinating. Like, in any other story, that's like, again, I've read a lot of terrible shit on the internet, and a lot of times that's played up as if, oh no, that's what happens and it's okay. But we don't get that. We have Charlene go through this whole thing where she's essentially assaulted and does not want this.
Mhm.
And the next morning, Karen and Billy try to play this off as like, oh, you were wonderful. That's why you're not tied anymore and you can stay with us and this is great. And Charlene kind of goes along for a minute. It's just like, oh, yes, but I need coffee. And, oh, you shouldn't keep full ashtrays next to the bed. That'll start a fire. And in just like an absolute amazing movement, she goes over, empties one of the ashtrays into the fireplace. It's a big glass ashtray, comes back around and just fucking cold clocks Billy in the side of the head with it. Just
Yep.
absolutely drops her. And just fucking down. And Karen is like frozen on the edge of the bed. And Charlene just gives her the kind of look and is like, do you want some of the same? And just like, holy shit, dude.
Understandably so.
Yeah, like she just played this as if everything was cool and then just laid them the fuck out and was just like, okay.
And also, like, this was never kind of mentioned before, but when she leaves that place, she's still naked. Like, there was never a scene in this place between the beginning of her interaction with Karen and Billy to the end where she actually wears clothes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like an action movie. She just takes one of them out, teases the other one, and then just walks out naked. Like, yeah, and you'll never fucking have this again, or I'll kill you. And then it's just, that's it. It's just like, you know, the word badass comes up pretty much a lot.
Something tells me, I don't know what it is, but something tells me we've not seen the end of Karen, Billy, or that cabin.
Oh no, I think there's gonna be a return to this. It keeps like switching from like what you would expect with any kind of like erotica into just like a fucking action movie, like I spit on your grave out of nowhere. And it's kind of fascinating.
And this takes place just like within a few pages.
Yeah, it's really just like, I mean, just like, holy shit, it really is just kind of like wild. And again, just referencing back to the title and how everybody is just like, oh, but she's just like the devil. And it's like, but not without purpose. You keep pushing her into doing this shit. You keep acting like she's evil, but you're the one who did it.
Well, and it's funny. At There was a study done, going back to the anti-psychiatry movement, where um women went in to be treated, but not necessarily for being homosexual. It was for being homosexual.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who are we kidding? But they framed it as, we're studying the depression that results from being homosexual. It's like, no, it's almost if you kind of might start feeling a little bit depressed, or you might have some complicated feelings if you spend your whole life being treated like this,
Mm-hmm.
specifically for your presenting queerness.
Mm-hmm. Charlene also has a kind of, I mean, given the title, but, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, a kind of devil-may-care attitude.
Yeah.
We have the moment where she gets to working at the drive-in,
Hmm.
and she is telling the car hop about wanting to go to Chicago, and she's just like, oh, I wish I could go with you. And she's like, why can't you? Well, I've got to get money together before I can go anywhere. I'm not going to charge you to take you along. Yes, but when I get there, what I do? You'd find something. It's literally, she's just like, it'll happen. The universe is what it is. And she can have such like a stark, like, push, like an absolute brutality, like when she just took down Billy like that. But at the same time, she doesn't dwell on like, I have to have all these plans, I have to have all these things in a row. She just kind of rolls with it, even if rolling with it means clocking someone upside the head with a glass ashtray. Which is fascinating.
And it takes me to this set of questions, and if we could just like pause on that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Why were people so willing to be led by circumstances real or imagined? Why couldn't they make their own circumstances?
Mm-hmm. It's
What has brought us to this point, and how do we answer this set of questions?
it's like the way she handles a situation, the way she kind of just flows through it with, again, like the whole thing between how she got to the cabin in the first place was because she was invited to a party and was just like, oh, I haven't partied in a while, what the hell? And
Yeah,
just rolled with it. And then things happened, and then she got her way out of it. And it
yeah,
makes me think of, to not to get too weird anime, it makes me think of the character of Spike from Cowboy Bebop. That's his entire
sure, yeah,
way he does his life. Everything is just whatever happens, happens.
yeah,
And he just kind of rolls with whatever's there. He has, a job, but at the same time, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Uh,
yeah.
the universe will provide, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. And
Well, yeah,
it
yeah,
very much
exactly.
kind of makes me think of that. Like, yes, she does have her more like dominant moments, but a lot of it is just like she doesn't, so far, we haven't gotten to the end of the book, but she doesn't so far approach other people, they approach her. She doesn't
Hmm.
outright reject anything that could be interesting. If it doesn't work out the way she wants it to, she finds a way to make it work. But it's always about just kind of going with the things that are happening around her.
Yeah, and that brings me back to this first question: why were people so willing to be led by circumstances? And I emphasize these words, real or imagined.
Mm-hmm.
What makes something a real circumstance versus an imagined circumstance to Charlene, would you say?
I don't know. I really don't know. It is fascinating that like
Mm.
stuff kind of happens. The most we've seen her push against something was when she wanted to live on her own,
Yeah.
and that was like the real fight that she had to have. And then after that, it was just kind of like it feels almost as though when I was younger, I knew that I wasn't uh, straight, but I
Yeah.
didn't know like what I was. I just knew it wasn't the thing that everybody else said. And it was one of those things where it's kind of like I just didn't have a word. I knew it wasn't this, but I also knew it wasn't that. And I didn't have a word for it until like I think I was around 16 or so, and online I heard something about like they were just like something I was reading was discussing bisexuality, and it was like a switch got flipped, and it wasn't that I wasn't bi until then; it's that I didn't have a term for it, and it
Yeah.
kind of feels like that is a similar experience that Charlene had with the
Mhm.
first time with Marianne. It's like she knew she wasn't straight, but it wasn't until she was actually with this other woman she was like, oh, I get it now. This is
Yeah.
what this means. And it's not that she had to be like a lot of bullshit religious nonsense always says like, oh, that makes you gay. It's like, no, she always was. She didn't have a word for it. And now that there's like a term and a definition, it makes sense.
And I will say, yes, and that was also very much my experience. I It was kind of a slow progression, but I I I found the words and they just fit. And I came to learn that um there's a philosophy that we all have language blocks until we find the names for things. Like when we are young children, um someone might point to a rubber ball and call it a ball. And
Mm-hmm.
in our minds, suddenly that block goes away and we associate this object with that word. Um, so it's just a language block. That's all it is.
It is. It's similar if you've done a lot of technical work. Uh, you have those moments a lot.
Yeah.
You know that you need a part for something, but you don't know what it's called. You just know you need a part. So you try to
Mhm.
trace down what it is. You need this thing in a car that manages getting fuel from the tank to the engine. So you start looking up like, okay, does it? It's a mover. It's a vacuum. But none of these words are the right thing until you come across a listing for something like fuel pump, and then suddenly, like, of course, that's what it is. And it's kind of a similar feeling. Is it's like
Yeah.
I know that I'm not this. I've always been, what I am, but like, what is it called? What is the word? And
Yeah.
then you hear the word and you're like, oh, that's it. That's the thing. I finally get it.
Mhm.
And it feels like that moment happened with Charlene because she's so easygoing most of the time. She's so
Yeah.
things happen and I just kind of go with them. And then the moment it's like, not only are you clearly not straight, you're more of the dominant role in this. And once that happens, she's like, oh yes, that's me. That's what I feel. She didn't really express it heavily because there wasn't a word or a term or anything for it. And now suddenly she's kind of thrust into this area where there are people who are like trying to either take advantage of that, like how Karen was like, no, I'm the one who does all this, or to force her to be something else, like how Billy tried to.
Right. And it's funny because I I even hesitate to call Charlene dominant, and in some ways, like, she is and she isn't. But what's key is that, and it's exactly what is said in the text, she wants to retain control of the situation, and that does not always mean dominance, and she learns that.
Yeah. So this was she's learning throughout this in kind of a very rocky way what
Huh.
she is specifically,
Yeah.
but it goes through some pretty harsh circumstances to get to that. And her getting there is just a hell of a journey. And this is only chapter 2. We
Yeah.
still have, I don't know how many chapters are in this book, actually.
6.
6. Okay, so there's only 6 chapters in this. But we are done chapter 2. That is what we've gotten from chapter 2. And I honestly, at this stage, there's, you read any kind of large uh, epic of books or even just like one book, you kind of have an idea after a little while of like, where's this going to end? Where are we going with this? You know that eventually the hobbits are going to make it to Mount Doom and destroy the One Ring. I
Yeah.
actually have no idea how this is going to end. I
Yeah.
really don't know, because it's like it's fascinating, and again, all of this stuff I read online, all
Mhm.
of the things that I've watched people do reviews of this have been like, haha, funny, weird lesbian book, but that's it. And
Mhm.
it's like, no, but it's so much more than that, though. Like, there is so much more going on.
It's a product of its time in a very strange way, and you don't really. What's what I find so interesting about it is that it's would be easy for this book to be very clear about where it stands, but it's not.
Yeah,
We don't know
it
if it
chooses to be
advocates or
more
if it doesn't.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, you hope that it's well intentioned, but even if it's not, you kind of get the feeling that there's just kind of some secret advocacy there.
There
Um,
is.
yeah,
It's interesting.
there's there, there's this whole thing called accidental ally. I don't know if you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I don't think so.
it reminds me of that. If this book was not well intentioned, then it's definitely an accidental ally at some points.
It does have a lot of that. Like it definitely has the language of the time.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, let's be completely fair, the 60s wasn't exactly the most open time to be gay in any way.
No, not at all.
But it was a beginning, and there's a lot of language that was interesting to be used in the way it is.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it doesn't feel like it's specifically being insulting.
Yeah.
And again, to go back to the beginning of chapter 2, to have such a massive amount of like background character building in a book that was constantly being promoted on every other thing that I've seen about it as just like 60s era satanic panic lesbian porn.
Yeah.
It's definitely not. It definitely has a lot more going on than that, and it's kind of surprising that it's been kind of glossed over in such a manner, because like there's definitely something going on.
Mhm. And like we have to again go back and acknowledge that even though it's stated that this book was well, this book gives, you know, a woman's name, or what we would say is a woman's name. It's assumed to have been written by someone named Fred Haley,
Yes.
but we also don't know that. We don't know who
Yes.
this author is. We don't know their history. We don't know their circumstances. Um, Now, Fred Haley, um, he, it's hard to describe what he was known for. I guess he was an author, but all we really know is that he was known for writing some pulp fiction. People attribute Satan Was a Lesbian to him because of some similarities in writing style. We don't actually know if it was him.
Yeah, that's true. It, in all possibility, because it was like these things are similar, is a kind of a weak argument to say that that could be him. It's possible that Monica Roberts, who is credited with writing this book,
Mhm.
is the actual author. It's also possible that that's also a pen name. For the longest time, Stephen King, for example, wrote under the name Richard Bachman,
Yeah.
who's not a real person, and wrote several books. And it's possible that this person wrote this under a pen name and may have been influenced by
Fred Haley, queer fiction.
yes, it's possible that they were influenced by him, but we don't really know. And that's what makes this
Mhm.
kind of an interesting mystery, is there's no real way of knowing,
Yeah.
short of contacting the actual person who wrote it, and there's no real way to do that either. So it's just
Yeah.
kind of a fascinating piece of its time
Yeah.
that is really just, it is its own thing. It's very much its own thing. And again, like, all I know from this before going into this was what the internet had said, and the internet was just like, haha, funny weird lesbian book. And
Yeah.
it definitely, it has its weird moments, I won't lie.
It does, but it doesn't end there. You
No,
know,
but it
we
definitely
should,
goes further. Yeah, there's a lot more to it.
and like if we kind of take it at face value, it is more than it's advertised to be. It is more than it appears to be. Um, and if if you look at this very objectively, like I even said, you know, the way I'm approaching this is not, you know, this is a bad book, this is written badly, and therefore, you know, we're just gonna goof on it. No, we can't do that.
No.
We've got to figure
We
this
have
out.
books like that we'll get to eventually, but not this
Of
one.
course.
This
Yeah.
one started as an anomaly and is still continuing to hold up
Yeah.
that interesting sense. Like that it's definitely an anomaly, but not a bad one.
Yeah,
So,
precisely.
but it's yeah. So, but that's gonna do it for chapter 2.
Yeah.
If you guys enjoyed this, please make sure to do the whatever thing. I don't care. YouTube sucks. Anyway, we have Ko-Fi, which helps support this channel and keep the lights on in here. We also have a merch store, which we should probably make some merch specifically for this show. I don't know if that's a thing people would want, but I think maybe that's a thing we should do.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
I think it might be fun.
Yeah.
We are, like River said, there are 6 chapters to this book, and we're almost halfway through. Afterwards, I don't know what we're going to work on, but we might have some ideas. But if you enjoyed this, make sure you do all the things.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow Moon on Anchor. And if you want to follow me and all the weirdness that I do, you can go to purposefulprose.org/blog and read about what I think about what I read.
Yeah, it's a wonderful blog. I definitely recommend checking it out.
Thank you.
Well, it's true. So that's going to be it for us. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in the next chapter.
See you in the next chapter. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.